is hereby called to order. We have the presence of a quorum, and the meeting has been duly called, and notice of the meeting has been posted for the time and manner required by law. First up, we have information items. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. We're going to start out this evening by talking about the 2018 STAAR end-of-course results and the district's accountability. I think Deanna is going to start that presentation and turn it over to staff.
Absolutely. So good evening, Board President Burdine, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Dupree. Tonight, Academic Affairs, in collaboration with the Department of School Leadership, will provide an update on Fort Bend ISD's 2018 state and federal accountability ratings under the new A through F system. Accountability and Assessment, led by Audra Udi, will present an overview of the rating system and the scores earned by Fort Bend ISD. Teaching and Learning, led by Stephanie Williams, will provide information on instructional supports in the community-based accountability system. And Dr. Indelicato from the Department of School Leadership will present information associated with school improvement planning. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to Audra Udi so she can get us started.
Good evening, Board of Trustees and Dr. Dupree. Tonight we will be speaking to you on Tonight we will be speaking with you on the new state accountability system, which includes our new A to F ratings, including student achievement and growth data. We will also speak to the new federal accountability system, which includes performance targets, as well as designation of comprehensive, targeted, and additional targeted schools, as well as our FBISD instructional and leadership responses to those designations, and any information that we can share on the 2019 accountability updates at this time. Our ratings were released publicly on August 15th, and those are available through our district website. This evening, when we speak to the instructional supports, Stephanie Williams and also Anthony Indelicato will help share specific details on tiered levels of support that we are offering our campuses, as well as what we can systematically expect for all of our campuses. One other important detail that pertains to this year that made it a little unusual is that FBISD was the beneficiary of a waiver this year for Hurricane Harvey, in that we missed 10 instructional days for hurricane and 2 additional instructional days for icy weather. And so it was an extraordinary year in terms of the number of instructional days that were missed this school year, which qualified us for this waiver. Now I will present an overview of the new accountability system. In as straightforward terms as I can, there is a great deal of depth and detail to each of the formulas behind the overall rating system and each of the domains. But I'd like to overview for you what you can expect from the new accountability A to F accountability system in terms of how the district gets rated. First of all, each district in the state received an overall rating based on 3 new domains. And 70% of our score comes from performance in either domain 1 or 2, and 2 has 2 parts. So it's either 1, 2A, or 2B. And then 30% of our performance comes from domain 3, which is called closing the gaps. When we look at this information and compare it to the prior accountability system, in the prior accountability system, I would tell you, even though it was not simple, it was much simpler than what this new accountability system is. In each of these domains, there is both passing information as well as growth information for each of our students, and there is also college, career, and military readiness indicators for high schools and districts in each of these domains. So it's not as simplistic in terms of prior systems where one domain represented one set of data. Under the old system, Index 1 would have been passing percentages, Index 2 would have been growth data, 3 would have been closing the gaps, and 4 would have been post-secondary. So it's now blending all of that information through all 3 domains. What you can also anticipate is that in December of 2018, you will get a projection of A to F ratings for campuses based on this year's information. So we won't have that until December of this year. Okay. So let's look at how the district did. And the districts were rated A to F this year, whereas campuses were still rated Met Standard or Improvement Required. However, the district rating of Met Standard or Improvement Required is based on a completely different set of formulas and elements than it has been in the past. So there were major changes for the campuses, even though the rating labels remained the same. So for FBISD in 2018, our overall rating that was earned based on a scale score of a 90, which would have put us in the A range. However, because of a rule that exists in the new accountability system, we were capped at an 89, which would be a B, and that comes off of districts that have any campus that is not rated or potentially IR campuses would cause the district to be capped at a score of 89. So that's our background information. However, because of the waiver, we are considered not rated. Any district that was a recipient of the waiver but earned an A got the A designation. Any district that received a B or below received the not rated designation for this year. In Domain 1, student achievement, we earned an 89, which is in the B, top of the B range, just shy of the A range. In Domain 2A for student progress, and that's where we're assessing individual students' growth. Are they making at least a year worth of progress? And so for that area, we scored an 84, again within the B range. And then Domain 2B is relative performance. And what they do is compare our district to other districts like us based on our economically disadvantaged percentage. As of our snapshot date, whatever that percentage was, that's who we get compared to. So our scale score there was an 83 or a B this year. And then Domain 3, closing the gaps, we made a scale score of 95. And we were capped at an 89 because there is also a new rule in the accountability system here that applies when any particular campus earns an improvement required label on that particular domain, that it caps the district at no more than an 89 as a score in this particular domain as well. Okay. Now we would like to share some trend information with you. Even though we've moved from one accountability system to the next, we can go back and look at passing rates in order to be able to assess our trends. And so from looking at that information, summed across grades 3 through 8 in high school for the district performance, what we see in reading is that in spite of having missed 10 days for Hurricane Harvey last year and 2 ice days, our performance has remained relatively static over the last 3 years. And that's true of approaches grade level or above, so that's what the state passing level is, and then meets grade level or above, and master's grade level or above, the highest performance category. So when we look at this information, knowing that we've moved to a new accountability system and we missed the number of days that we did last year, it's pretty good that we stayed static in spite of those things. However, of course, we want to disrupt this pattern and be able to see upward trends in growth. What it also tells us is that we need to, this new system focuses heavily on the growth factor for every single student. So what we want to be sure we are doing for students is that every student, regardless of what type of program they're served in, is making at least a year worth of growth in their STAAR performance in order for them individually to be getting the benefit, as well as the campus and the district to receive the benefit of that performance. When we look at mathematics, we see a similar trend. And so here again, you see static performance levels within math that approaches grade level, meets grade level, and master's grade level, broken out by each ethnic group as well as economically disadvantaged. Rather than take you through every single content area, what I can tell you is that the graphs for each subject area, writing, science, and social studies, all look very similar to these graphs for math and reading performance. So what we, again, want to do is to find the most appropriate way to shift the paradigm from focusing on passing percentages to focusing on growth for every single student in order to disrupt that pattern. Okay, distinction designations. For the 2018 school year, the way that distinction designations were determined remained the same as it had under the prior system. So basically what happens with distinction designations is that each campus in the district is compared to 39 other districts or schools like that campus or district, and whoever falls in the top tier, so we're all basically ranked and tiered, and whoever falls in the top tier for the most growth in each of the indicators receives a distinction designation for that area. With distinction designations, there is one available for each academic content area, and then there are distinctions available for post-secondary readiness, as well as, let me make sure I'm communicating correctly here. Top 25% in growth. So that's student progress, that's closing gaps, and that's post-secondary readiness. So it's either straight up improvement on each of the content areas or demonstrating the overall post-secondary readiness and growth. Out of the distinction designations available this year, 134 were earned by our campuses for Fort Bend ISD. 40 campuses earned those distinctions, and 6 of our campuses earned all possible distinctions for their campus. Now let's look at the federal performance targets. You may have known these previously under prior systems as system safeguards. However, they have taken on a new flavor in the new system in that there are new formulas and new expectations under the federal performance targets. There were 91 performance indicators for Fort Bend ISD. That varies from one district to the next depending on the makeup of our student groups. So of the 91 performance targets for Fort Bend ISD, we earned 89% or 81 of the 91 available indicators. And when we look at the indicators that were missed, so there were 10 of the 91 or about 11% that were missed, 7 of those student performance targets were in the area of mathematics growth. Each student group has a different target. And so it's important that we go back to those tables and look at what each of the targets were for each of the student groups. That is a factor of the new federal performance targets. Whereas in the past, it was one number for every student group. That is no longer true with the new performance targets. So we missed 7 of the 10 based on mathematics growth. And so what that tells us again is just how critical growth is in the new accountability system for every single student. So you can miss a performance target on a group of students who may have had great successful passing rates in the past, but aren't showing at least a year worth of growth. That's an important factor in the new system. One of the other missed targets was in school quality for our special education, college, career, and military readiness indicators. And what we are seeing here is that we just really need to focus in on the available ways for students to earn their college, career, and military readiness targets and really make sure that every student is meeting at least one of the performance indicators. And then finally, 2 missed targets in the area of graduation rate for special education and English language learners. And let me also say that the federal performance target is different than the state target for graduation rate. Here, in the case of graduation rate, it is set at a constant 90% for all student groups. And that performance target is based on the 4-year graduation rate only. Whereas in the state performance information, it's based on the 4, 5, or 6-year, whichever is the better scenario for our district. In other words, how this impacts the special education population is that many of our students progress on beyond 4 years in order to earn their graduation requirements and to be able to graduate from high school. So we're not getting credit under this new federal performance target for students who continue into a 5th or a 6th year to finish their high school requirements. Now let's look at the campus ratings. 71 of our 75 campuses who were rated this past year, again, were rated as either met standard or not rated due to the Hurricane Harvey waiver. So 95% of our campuses earned the met standard rating. One campus that was formerly improvement required earned their met standard rating. That was Ridgemont Elementary School. So we're proud of the progress that they made this past year. And then we have 4 not rated campuses due to the Hurricane Harvey waiver, being Glover, Hunters Glen, Lantern Lane, and McAuliffe Middle School. At this time, we're going to invite up Dr. Indelicato, who will share information in regards to school improvement efforts.
Good evening. As your school improvement officer, I would like to provide you an update on our campuses that are going to be involved in the school improvement process this year. First of all, though, we are very proud of one of our schools who continues to grow and met standard, and as Dr. Udi just said, that was Ridgemont Elementary. They met standard and are now in the first year out of IR status. Of course, in order to establish and continue a solid foundation, Ridgemont will continue in the continuous improvement planning process for this school year. Under the new accountability requirements, we have 4 not rated campuses who will undergo TEA's continuous improvement planning processes and will develop turnaround plans. These campuses are Glover Elementary, Hunters Glen Elementary, Lantern Lane Elementary, and McAuliffe Middle School. 2 campuses have also been designated as continuous improvement and support, and that is Hunters Glen and Lantern Lane. District and campus leadership have already initiated the improvement work for this upcoming school year and will continue to work on targeted improvement plans outlining the campus's systemic approach to producing significant and sustainable gains in achievement. While each school will participate in the continuing improvement processes, TEA does not require board approval of the improvement plans for not rated or comprehensive improvement schools. However, we will continue to keep our board apprised of progress for each of these campuses by providing regular board updates. So under the federal accountability system, Fort Bend has 32 schools designated as additional targeted support. You'll see them in the bottom rectangular box that's light blue. This designation is similar to the missed adequate yearly progress under an older accountability system. To put this in perspective, the state of Texas currently has well over 4,000 schools designated for additional targeted support based on the new federal performance targets. The designation means that these schools had at least one student group that missed a designated federal performance target. This year, due to the Hurricane Harvey waiver, there are no PEG schools designated in Fort Bend. TEA did not designate any targeted support schools in the state for this year. However, this designation will start in August of 2019. Lastly, several of our principals are present tonight, and I want to thank each of them for their hard work, getting this year off to a smooth start with positive momentum leading their respective staffs. So if our principals would please stand to be introduced. We have them in the front row. So from Lantern Lane Elementary, we have Dr. Trinae Hill. And from Hunters Glen Elementary, we have Dr. Crystal Gardner. And from Glover Elementary, we have Miss Nikki Roberts. And from Krista McAuliffe Middle School, we have Mr. Andre Roberson. Thank you, principals. Thank you. And at this time, Chief Saavedra will share information about the state and district accountability.
I wanted to thank all the principals for being here. That's great. Thank you.
Do y'all want to change the slide? There we go. We thought it might be important for us to share with you some of the state trend information associated with the new accountability system to kind of put some things into perspective for you. So we have on the screen a scatter plot that demonstrates the correlation between a district's overall score and their percentage of economically disadvantaged students. So what you see on the screen here is that the color-coded dots that are in blue and yellow represent some of our most affluent school districts in the state of Texas. And what you see in orange and in red, those dots represent our school districts which have much higher percentages of economically disadvantaged students. So I'm sure that, as you look at the graph, it's fairly self-explanatory that the more affluent your school district, the higher probability that you're going to score in the range of A or B in terms of your district score in the new system of A through F. When you look at the scatter plot, you also see that your yellow, red, and orange, well, specifically red and orange, or orange and red, you're going to score, your range of score is going to be probably in the C or lower range. So we thought that that was important for us to note. When we look at that trend against where our schools fell across the school district, this first scatter plot shows our elementary schools, and you can see that the trend is very similar even within our school district. The line going across is the scale score that our schools had to meet to receive, to meet the state requirement. And so you can see the distribution is very similar to what the state distribution is. As we look at the middle school trend, you see a similar distribution as well as at the high school level. So what I'm here to say is that as a school district, we do want to defy these odds. We know that we have a strong instructional plan in place that can begin to disrupt the pattern that we see across the state, because we don't want to meet the same pattern in Fort Bend ISD. We want to do much better for our students. One of the bold steps that we're taking to disrupt that pattern is ascribing to an accountability system that is community-based, that can tell the full story of what we do for our students in Fort Bend ISD, grounded in the profile of a graduate. I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Williams at this time so she can give us some details about our community-based accountability system, and then walk us through some of the specific instructional supports that will help us move in that direction.
Thank you, Deanna. Good evening. If you think of the visual, the graphic that's up there, as a sphere rather than a flat circle, that sphere would represent everything that educators and leaders in Fort Bend ISD do for student benefit. So all of the actions across this district, including those taken by you as the Board of Trustees, that we hope to result in student benefit. The state assessment data represents one small spot on that sphere. It's one test at one point in the year, measuring how students were doing on that day related to student expectations. The local assessment framework is a little bit more comprehensive in that it's ongoing over 187 days in the school year to provide feedback in order to develop students as owners of their learning. But the bigger picture is, what are we trying to accomplish with our students? What are the attributes that when a student holds a diploma from Fort Bend ISD, they can say, this is who I am and this is what I stand for? The community-based accountability system will endeavor to define those in Fort Bend, and also to build an evidentiary plan whereby we can give an accounting to you each year around our work towards student benefit, and develop findings that we could utilize to engage in a continuous cycle of improvement. As we work to develop that community-based accountability system, which we believe will be a stronger system to support student benefit in Fort Bend ISD, it's incumbent upon us as educators to continue to engage in a continuous cycle of improvement, to think about where we are and where we want to go for our students. So this graphic represents a response plan related to the data that we have now in the district, both at the state level and at the local level. This improvement plan must include both short and long-term approaches so that we can see immediate intervention at some of our most at-risk campuses, and so that we don't forget the long game around student benefit, that they become owners and know the curriculum at a deep level. This response plan is grounded in the research of RTI, and what RTI research tells us is that Tier 1 instruction should meet the needs of 80% of our students, meaning that the teacher delivering instruction should help 80% of our students to meet grade level expectations. Research around RTI also states that about 20% of our students will need additional interventions in order to be boosted up to grade level standards. When we look at the intervention first related to staffing allocations, we've thought about this tiered instructional model. With respect to our staff, we have literacy and math coaches in place at all of our Title I campuses in order to build capacity to provide Tier 1 instruction to all of our students. We also have interventionists in place at those Title I campuses so that students receive dedicated time and intervention to fill gaps in their learning. One of the things that we are focusing on this year is using a job role service and support tool in order to collect data to make sure that these staff, that their time each day is spent directed to either building capacity in teachers or building capacity in students, so that we know that this is money well spent and we can see the benefit from the staff members. Related to developing student ownership of learning and behavior, first, we have a strong continued focus on positive behavior intervention supports and restorative discipline. We know that we have to increase our emphasis around mental health awareness, particularly with trauma-informed practices for our teachers and our leaders on our campuses. And so we'll have a dedicated effort to putting systems in place so that students are supported not just academically, but behaviorally throughout the year. Related to the academic side of students owning their learning, we know in Fort Bend ISD that we want students to utilize the tools in the curriculum in order to engage in self and peer assessment. Those tools are knowing the learning intention, which defines what it is they need to know in their learning. When we think about growth, as Audra shared with us, we need every student to make a year's growth. So first, students need to be able to identify where they are, and then they need to understand where they're going in their learning. The formative assessment cycle, particularly the assessment framework, helps our teachers and students to be able to do that at all levels. It begins with a diagnostic universal screener that identifies skill gaps in students in reading and mathematics. It is supported through district-level formative assessments or learning assessments that focus on high leverage standards or skills across content areas. And then it is supported most directly by a campus formative assessment system that engages students in using rubrics and checklists to monitor their learning and their progress through the curriculum. Next, our Renaissance 360 data helped us to identify a need to focus on literacy in Fort Bend ISD. Earlier I mentioned that at the Tier 1 level, 80% of student needs should be met with Tier 1 instruction. Right now, our data shows that only 61% of our students in literacy are meeting grade level standards with Tier 1 instruction. What that tells us is we have to get stronger on our implementation of the curriculum and the balanced literacy instructional model. Another 39% of students need intensive interventions in order to come up to grade level standards. What that tells us is we need to ensure that we have a strong structure, system, and fidelity of those interventions going on all of our campuses. So I'd like to share a little bit about how we're approaching that. First, related to Tier 1, we began this summer refocusing all of our ELA teachers around the balanced literacy instructional model, particularly the components of independent reading and teachers conferring with students so that they get feedback around their reading skills. Next, we had training around the tiered instructional model, meaning when we have data that tells us that students don't know, what is it that we do differently as we plan instruction? And then finally, we engage teachers in learning around how to craft formative assessments that allow students to develop ownership. That's at the Tier 1 level. Throughout the year, we have job-embedded professional learning where we have experts go into the classroom with teachers and model the balanced literacy model with them. We've extended that training to leaders and principals across the district where they attend learning on what the model should look like. They engage in guided observations to learn how to give focused feedback to teachers so that we can ensure that those processes are in place. And of course, we know that we are implementing the Early Literacy Center to lay a strong foundation in primary grades and to see if that model will help us to have larger gains with our most at-risk students. When we think about intervention and how we're supporting intervention, and some of these are short-term necessities. So first, we had to take a strong look at our intervention resources. When we reviewed our Renaissance 360 data at the elementary level, we noticed that some of the issues that students were having around early literacy related to decoding and fluency. And that comes through a strong phonics instruction. So our curriculum does articulate the need to focus on phonics and early literacy, but it lacked a strong resource that provided teachers guidance in how to explicitly teach phonics skills. So we engaged in an RFP in the spring We were able to identify a strong phonics-based resource, and that resource will be implemented into all of our elementary classrooms this year. It does come with training for teachers, and they're very excited about having that resource to support students who are struggling in some of those early literacy skills. Next, at the secondary level, we identified a stronger need to engage in Tier 3 instruction with some of our students. I'm sure you saw the report that looked at students who were reading on grade level at the secondary level. And what we decided to do is expand our intervention tool at the secondary level, leveled literacy intervention. We've had success with that intervention at the elementary level, and so now at identified campuses, we have provided that resource and training to either their interventionist or teachers to work with students so that we could bridge some of the gaps related to literacy. Once we have resources in place, the next important piece of a strong intervention is dedicated time related to interventions. And so in collaboration with the Department of School Leadership, Academic Affairs has engaged in a master schedule review to look at not just Tier 1 instructional time, but what is that dedicated time for Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions in our most at-risk campuses. Already, some of those audits have resulted in changes in order to provide teachers and students with the time needed to focus on the gaps that they know that students have. Finally, we know that we have to increase the monitoring protocols to ensure the fidelity of the implementation. You haven't received this report, but I believe very soon you'll get a report on the leveled literacy intervention at the elementary level. What we know is that students who engaged in that intervention, only 12% had to return for that Tier 3 intervention in the next year. So what that tells us is that 88% of students who engaged in that intervention were able to move to the next grade level and achieve and work in that grade level without returning to Tier 3. That's evidence of a strong intervention plan, and that's what we hope to see at the secondary using that same model. In order to ensure fidelity of the student support teams is what we call them on our campuses. Each campus has a student support team that looks at data from Renaissance 360 and identifies students who might go into these types of intervention. What we've done is we've asked for a liaison to the campus that will meet monthly in order to review the process for student support teams, and then also to engage in a review of the effectiveness of the interventions that are going on with students on campuses. And then we have assigned our intervention and enrichment coordinators to provide campus support at identified campuses. So speaking of support, the only way to ensure that this response plan is effective is to really think about what is the support needed at particular campuses. Because we know with the number of campuses that are in Fort Bend ISD, what is needed at one may not be the same as what is needed at another. And so we wanted to look at the appropriate level of support, and so we engaged in a process to tier campuses. So the Tier 1 level is representative of what services would be provided to all campuses. So we will continue the campus support team walkthrough structure to look at the implementation of the written curriculum, to determine how well we're engaging in a formative assessment cycle, and to provide training around PLC practices, including the use of data. Tier 2 schools, we've identified for specialized instructional support, and the real focus of this specialized instructional support is around content area instructional practices like balanced literacy, inquiry-based science, or guided math. We want to be able to develop classrooms in Fort Bend ISD so that we don't have to take people outside of Fort Bend to see the expertise that's needed with our students. Finally, Tier 3 campuses where data identified. Some of the campuses that Mr. Andelicato introduced their principals a few minutes ago are part of this Tier 3 structure. Through our campus support team structure, we have implemented a needs assessment that will result in monthly classroom monthly visits to each of these campuses. So principals first reflected on the professional learning community practices at their campus and how teachers were engaging with the curriculum and formative assessment. Our teams went and walked the campuses with the principals, and then we talked about where is a starting place to improve instructional practice. These campuses will receive professional learning community support. We'll go and visit the learning communities so we can see how they're going about planning instruction and intervention for students. And we'll work with the principal to develop an identified support plan and also to support professional learning that they may identify along the way. At this time, I will turn the presentation back over to Audra to provide a look ahead.
To round off our presentation this evening, we would like to be able to share with you what you can anticipate in the 18-19 accountability system. One of the things that the Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Morath, has indicated is with the great authority he's been given under more recent legislation, that he hopes to hold the accountability system stable for 5 years at a time in order to ensure that we can compare apples to apples, so to speak, from one year to the next. We do know that as we move into the 2019 school year, that we anticipate remaining in 3 domains that will continue to assess passing rates as well as growth rates for all of our students and our college career and military readiness indicators. So that part of the system will absolutely remain stable in 2019, even though accountability manuals and all of the rules don't get released until usually July before the ratings come out in mid-August. We can anticipate that district and campuses will receive letter grades for each of the 3 domains as well as an overall letter grade. In addition to that, PEG designation will occur next year, and 3 new categories. We used to know those as focus and priority under 2 categories. Now there are 3 called comprehensive, targeted, and additional targeted support designations based on how campuses perform in relation to their growth. We also will be in the process of developing our community-based accountability system. I should also tell you that even though the commissioner's plan is to have the system stay stable for 5 years at a time, one of the things we know for sure will be different this next year is that this past school year, for the first time, a brand new version of the TELPAS test was administered, and those results are also factored into Domain 3. TEA asked for a waiver from USDE to have those removed from the results for this year and was denied that opportunity for a waiver. So what they had to do to assess TELPAS for this year, and it happened like the week of the accountability ratings coming out, was that they had to go back and use 2 prior years worth of data to assess growth in TELPAS. They could not use the new version of the test that was given this year. So when we move into this year's accountability, we'll get assessed on the new form of the TELPAS test, which is a more difficult assessment than the prior TELPAS tests have been. I'm gonna not be able to quote Tanu here. Thank you.
English language proficiency.
Thank you.
Miss, could you say that in the
English
microphone?
language proficiency system
Thank you. Tanu.
assessments.
Okay. So the Texas English Language Proficiency Assessment will be the brand new version under the 2019 accountability rating. So that's one major change. Another change that's been planned into the system is that we will continue to grow with how the college career and military readiness indicators are assessed for us as a district and at the high school level. In that not all of the indicators that were planned had an acceptable form of measurement data available to us, and therefore TEA is having to work on agreements to build out that information to give us credit for the ways that students might earn those indicators. One example would be industry standard certifications. There are many different entities out there that give those industry certifications, and until we have agreements with all of them or a clearinghouse that collects all of that information, there's not a valid way to assess that for districts and campuses other than self-reporting type information. So there's a stage-in process that's planned based on career pathways, based on students who sign up or enlist in the military currently, and based on enrollment in certain types of career and tech courses right now that will eventually move toward being mostly based on earning certifications and completing a full pathway to earn our points. In addition to that, we can expect the 3 domains will remain: student achievement, school progress, Part A and Part B, and then closing the gaps. One of the elements that I would like to also mention in closing the gaps is that there are several new student groups in this calculation that we have never been assessed on in the past. For example, one of the things is that we will be assessed on formally special education, students who are formally in special education, as well as our former ELL students. and students who are continuously or non-continuously enrolled. That wraps up our presentation for this evening. At this time, we would like to entertain any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you for the presentation. Do we have any questions?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mr. Rice.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. Thank you for the presentation. A couple questions I have. Am I understanding that we are working on our own accountability system? I know we've been working on that for several years. When do we think we're going to have that up and running?
That's a great question. We have a timeline for that now. We have engaged in learning with the design team. The design team has begun to construct what we're referring to as pillars and key questions around that accountability system. We will pilot on hopefully 15 schools this year, 2 of those pillars, and have a reporting structure in September of 19. And then in the 19-20 school year, we will launch that district-wide and be able to have a reporting in September of 2020 district-wide.
2020?
Would be district-wide, yes, sir. We'll have a district report in September of 19, but we'll have district-wide with every campus represented in September of 2020.
Okay, well, that's important to me because I right now we have 3 accountability systems: the state, the federal government, and children at risk. And I've been hoping that we would have this long before 2020 to help refute some of the claims that children at risk makes. But I guess not. Am I understanding that so this is what I heard you say, in the current student achievement accountability system from the state in domain 3, which is closing the achievement gap, we earned a 95. I'm old school, I always say 95A, but not this time, right? Because we have 4 campuses in IR, so we got dinged on that. We don't get full credit. Is that right?
There are 2 rules that the commissioners selected to put in place after feedback from the public in regards to the commissioners' rules on accountability. And those 2 rules pertain to capping districts' performance based on the overall rating system or based on the domain-specific rating.
Okay, but that hasn't happened yet. And so the answer to my question is yes, we got dinged on it.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then I understand we have a bunch of distinction designations, 134. And I'm just wondering, where do those show up anywhere? How does the public find out about that? Because I don't think they know anything about that at all. All they know about is the letter grade we've received as a district, the numerical grade every campus has received, and they can easily convert that to a letter grade. And so it's almost like, who cares about the distinction designations, because nobody knows about that.
Okay.
How do we share that information?
There are a few ways that the information gets shared, but we can also look at how we can make that more
Well,
prominent.
how? Give me an example. How do we share that with the public? I mean, I'm writing op-eds. I'm talking to people all the time about accountability. I need some kind of bullet points from you on how to share that information. That's what I'm asking.
I'd be happy to help break down that information. One of the ways that we share that is through our posting of our public accountability information on our own website and on our campus website. So we do that as soon as we receive the information from the state. In addition to that, the state has also created a new report card type of system where they host a website that allows each member of the public to go in and look at the domain and overall ratings, and it also designates the distinction designations on that page, albeit the A's, the B's, the C's are much larger than the distinction information.
So we're going to tell parents, go to the state website and look something up.
No, sir.
No?
Okay.
Yeah, so if I could just chime in, Mr. Rice, I think there has been somewhat of an agreement amongst public schools that we are not putting a lot of effort and energy into the accountability system. We have all united in the sense that this is one snapshot, one piece of data. And so when the Chronicle or the American Statesman or the Dallas Morning News ask us to comment on it, we have unified and provided the data that's asked, but we don't want to tout all parts of the accountability system. So when we respond to the media, we give them the information, but we haven't spent a lot of effort into giving the system a lot of credence because we believe that the system is flawed. And that's the practice we've had for the last few years, and it's something we can certainly revisit, but it's been our philosophy for the last few years on how to respond to the media when it comes to the accountability system.
Okay. Dr. Dupree, are we participating, does Fort Bend ISD participate in the Fort Bend Regional P16 Council?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And a couple of years ago, we had a very effective reading recovery program, which we discontinued because the cost was prohibitive in terms of the amount of money we were spending on reaching kids. We had to find a way to leverage that. Are we still using that program?
No, sir, we are no longer using the reading recovery program. That has been replaced by the leveled literacy.
No, I know we're not using the reading recovery program. My question was, what replaced the reading recovery program, a proven reading recovery program? What replaced it, and are we still using that today? That's my question.
I apologize. We are using leveled literacy intervention as the intervention program to replace reading recovery, and we are still using that, and we have seen great rates of success and also serviced more students through that program.
Okay, but I thought I just heard you said that our literacy rates are really not where they need to be, and so we're focused on improving that. Is that right? Did I hear that correctly?
You heard that correctly, yet reading recovery addressed only first grade students. The leveled literacy intervention expanded that to K-5, and what I shared with you a few minutes ago is a pre-K-12 approach to literacy, because we did have some students before those were put in place that made it to our secondary schools in need of significant intervention.
Stephanie, you might revisit the number you shared during your report about 88% of the students.
Oh, yes, sir. Our data from the leveled literacy intervention, we're in year 3 now of implementing the leveled literacy intervention. So from year 1 to year 2, 88% of students who had that leveled literacy intervention did not have to return to a tier 3 intervention. That's a significant number related to intervention. Most of the time it's around 30 to 50%.
So you would judge that a success?
Yes, sir.
And then the last thing, the federal programs, the PEG designations, so I'm really not clear on that, but since we got what I'm hearing you say is we got a pass from Hurricane Harvey, and next year we're going to get dinged on those.
So 2 things actually happened this year. One is that the state has set some new rules in place to determine who the PEG campuses will be. The old rules of deciding based on any student group being at 50% or less is gone now. And the state will employ a new method with the domains, whereas if a campus or a district does not meet the domain 1 performance and the domain 2 performance, then that's what determines a PEG designation. But in this 2018 rating year, we did receive a pass on PEG designations for this year. However, that will come back into play next year.
Okay. Well, I always thought school finance was complicated. And I would also just say, Dr. Dupree, this is a very good reason why school board trustees should not get involved in managing principals at different campuses, because we lack the experience, the knowledge, and the capacity to do that. Now, is there anything we need to give you as a board to help move our 4 campuses out of IR?
Well, what I would say is the board has given us what we need. Now what we just need is the consistent support of that, which the board consistently provides. Because what we know, and Deanna alluded to this and the other staff, is that the direction the board has cast and the priorities the board has established about getting the curriculum in place is the bottom line. Now it just takes time, and we've been very wide. We've implemented many things. Now we need time, and we need the push to go deeper. We've got the curriculum. Now we just have to get every teacher using that curriculum on campuses with strong principal leadership.
I know it's difficult. I know it's very difficult. And so I've seen slides before about poverty, but I was in Chicago and this past summer and attending a conference there, and the refrain was, we cannot use poverty as an excuse not to move children out, for good student outcomes, and I agree with that. However, there's a reason why poverty impacts the ability for children to learn. And some things, there are a lot of things getting in their way. So we need to have the funding. We need to have the funding to make up for the gap that those kids have. And so I want to always be very careful to point that out to anybody that I'm talking to outside the hedges, so that they have a good understanding of that. And I appreciate everyone's efforts to do that and continue to make Fort Bend a great place. My last comment, and I really want us to change our refrain from "we want to do these things for our children" to "we will do these things for our children." Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Mrs. Towson.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I think you can hear the frustration in Mr. Rice's voice, and all of us share that frustration. And the reason for it is because we don't really believe in this system, but we're held accountable by it. And so I want to read just a couple of things about this system that I think are not just challenging for districts, but I think downright wrong to be judging students in this way. First of all, A through F is based mainly, almost exclusively, on STAAR testing. Almost exclusively. And only 3 grade levels in the elementary school, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, provide for the grade of an elementary school. So K, 1st, and 2nd grade students are not even included. They are not even included in assessing a grade or a rating to a school. In high schools, only 3 assessments: algebra, English 1, and English 2, which is freshmen and sophomores. So not juniors and seniors. And all of our high schools are rated that way. No biology. 3, English 1, English 2, and algebra. That's it. PSAT, SAT, and ACT scores are not included in the master's category. So we don't even look at whether our students are taking or passing these college level assessments. And each year, the TEA commissioner does not decide the STAAR passing score until after the children have taken the assessment. That is incredible to me. So I just wanted to list a couple of those things to put this in perspective and the challenges that we have to overcome. I agree with Mr. Rice that we need to get our local accountability system in place. We've been talking about it ever since I've been on the board. We did have some conversation about it in our vision and planning meeting. I'll leave that for Mrs. James to share, but we certainly are wanting to push this ball forward to make sure that we're telling our story. I agree with not giving credence to this system, but at the same time, we've got to have something to fight back with. And we know that you guys are on the front lines of it, but politically speaking, the trustees are on the front lines of it. And so we've got to be armed with the ammunition that we need as this session comes up, which I don't know that this session is going to do anything about it, but at least when we get questions from our community members. So that's going to be important. I want to thank the principals for being here this evening. I know your job is not easy. I echo what Mr. Rice said. We are here to support you and provide whatever you need, and we will do that 100%. We will have high expectations, no more than we have for ourselves, to make sure that our kids are learning. And so I just wanted to say that we support you. And we're here 100% for your kids and for your teachers, and to do whatever it takes, because this is not something that the board likes to see. We don't agree with the accountability system 100%, but we're still under it, and so we have to be mindful of that. I do want to give kudos to Ridgemont for coming out this year and for working hard, and I want to give additional kudos to Briargate, because they got 3 distinctions, I think. Is that right? 3 distinctions? Briargate got 3 distinctions. I think we should give them a round of applause. I mean, really. So that's in their second year of being out of IR, and I think it's a testament to the House is on Fire EDGE program that we put in place and that you guys developed, and so I just wanted to say that. Couple of questions I have. First of all, I'd love to hear the literacy success rate. I was one who was actually not a believer in reading recovery because it only targeted first graders, and it was not a good fit for my kid who had reading struggles. So I'm glad to see that we've implemented something that is helping more kids in more grades, and I'm very happy to hear that it's going to the secondary level because you know, we're not going to just dismiss those kids just because they're out of elementary school, and so I'm glad to hear that. For our special education, you guys said that our college and career and military readiness, we missed that student group indicator. Number one, can you explain what that means and what are we offering? Because I thought I heard you say that we needed to expand our offerings or the ability for our students to have access. Tell me what you mean by that.
So some of the indicators are centered around AP performance and enrollment, dual credit performance and enrollment, ACT, SAT, and a test called TSI that is the equivalent for those that we began administering broadly across all of our junior class this year. It's also industry standard certification. For our special education students, if they fulfill a career impacted graduation plan, that can help meet one of the indicators. In other words, we design a pathway that's specific for the needs of that student in accordance with their IEP, and there are special codes for that. But they need to have some type of career training that is a part of that pathway for them to graduation.
So is this this is a TEA standard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, because I'm going to tell you, as a mother of a child with a disability, that sounds absurd to me. I'm just going to say that right now. That sounds absolutely absurd to me. Because number one, my child is fully included and she's going to graduate with all the requirements for an endorsement that the state will not give her. And now they're telling me that we fail on this, and I'm not saying there's not work to be done, but we fail on this indicator because she's not in an AP course. That's ridiculous. She can't be in an AP course. She's not taking dual credit, which is also ridiculous. She cannot take a dual credit course and not meeting some of these other things. So how are we going to tackle that one?
So the list that I mentioned, the way that that list works is that it's, if you will, there are about 15 different indicators on there. If a student meets any one of those indicators, then they satisfy that requirement. So it's not that they need to meet all of those indicators. There are a variety of ways to help us ensure that every student can have a pathway that's appropriate for them. They are more predominantly based on post-secondary readiness for college, but there is the aspect of the workforce and careers.
But Texas doesn't offer a program for students with disabilities to go to college, so that seems a little bit disingenuous there. So, okay, well, I might want to learn more about that, but I'm not going to take up any more time with it right now. My other questions are, so EDGE worked, and I've read the report where we talk about the interventions and the comprehensive needs assessments and all the interventionists and the things that we're going to be bringing to our schools that struggled this past year. Explain to me why we aren't implementing EDGE in those campuses, or if we are taking elements of EDGE, which ones and why, because I don't understand why we wouldn't do it if it worked, at least at our elementary campuses.
So we've not had any formal discussions about expanding EDGE at the elementary level. We have focused on expanding our relay learning because that has also proven to be very helpful in terms of growing the expertise of our teachers. And so we have 4
Is
additional.
that something we're doing in EDGE? Is that part of the Relay? Well, tell me what Relay Learning is.
Relay is the instructional leadership cohort. It's a 1-year training that TEA has provided. And so last year we had 4 schools. We had Ridgemont and Briargate at the elementary level, McAuliffe, and Willow Ridge. And so this year we've expanded to another 4 schools, all elementary, Briargate,